Imagine a missile streaking across the sky at 3 times the speed of sound, climbing 60,000 feet in seconds, then pivoting on a dime and diving straight down into the deck of an enemy warship with surgical precision. No hesitation, no error, just pure, engineered lethality. That is not science fiction. That is the SM-6, the Standard Missile-6. And it may very well be the most versatile weapon ever put aboard a United States Navy warship. But here is the thing that most people do not know, the thing that the headlines always miss. The SM-6 was never supposed to do half of what it does today. It was built for one job, to shoot down aircraft and incoming missiles before they could reach the fleet. And it was very, very good at that job. But somewhere along the way, between 2015 and 2025, something remarkable happened. The engineers, the strategists, the weapons developers, they looked at what the SM-6 could already do, and they asked a question that changed naval warfare forever. What else can this thing kill? Today we are going to take a deep, immersive journey through one of the most fascinating and consequential weapons evolution stories in modern military history. We are going to go back to the very beginning, back to the Cold War origins of the Standard Missile family, back to the lessons learned from the Falklands, from the Persian Gulf, from decades of fleet defense doctrine, and we are going to trace the extraordinary journey of a weapon that refused to stay in its lane. A weapon that grew from a defensive shield into an offensive sword. A weapon that is now reshaping how the United States Navy, and indeed every major naval power on Earth, thinks about sea control, strike warfare, and the very nature of naval combat in the 21st century. This is the story of the SM-6, and it is one of the greatest weapons stories ever told. To understand why the SM-6 matters so much, you have to understand where it came from. You have to go back to the chaos and the terror of the Second World War, when kamikaze pilots were diving into American warships at terrifying speed, and the Navy realized for the first time that it needed a systematic, reliable way to shoot down fast-moving aerial threats before they reached the fleet. The answer was radar-guided surface-to-air missiles, and the Navy poured enormous resources into developing them through the late 1940s and into the 1950s. Those early missiles, the Terrier, the Talos, the Tartar, were enormous, complicated, and expensive. They required massive ships to carry them and enormous crews to maintain them. But they worked. They established the concept that would define naval air defense for the next 7 decades. By the 1960s, the Navy wanted something better. Something smaller, faster, more reliable, easier to manufacture in large numbers. What emerged from that requirement was the Standard Missile family, a modular, adaptable weapons system that could be upgraded over time as technology improved. The first Standard missiles, the SM-1, entered service in the late 1960s, and they represented a massive leap forward. They were smaller than their predecessors, they could be launched from a wider variety of ships, and they used a semi-active radar homing system that was far more reliable than the beam-riding guidance systems of the earlier generation. The SM-1 was a solid, dependable weapon, and it served the Navy well for many years. But the world was changing, and the threats were evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. The 1982 Falklands War was a watershed moment for naval aviation defense planners around the world. When Argentine aircraft sank HMS Sheffield and Atlantic Conveyor with Exocet anti-ship missiles, the entire naval world took notice. Suddenly, the threat was not just aircraft. It was missiles. Fast, low-flying, sea-skimming missiles that could be launched from dozens of miles away, giving defenders almost no warning time. The Navy had already been developing the SM-2, which offered longer range, better guidance, and the ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously through its compatibility with the Aegis combat system. But the Falklands underscored just how serious the anti-ship missile threat had become. This was not a theoretical problem anymore. Ships were sinking. Sailors were dying. The Aegis system, which began entering service in the early 1980s aboard the Ticonderoga-class cruisers and later the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, was revolutionary. It paired the SM-6 missile with a powerful phased-array radar and an automated combat management system that could track hundreds of targets simultaneously and engage multiple threats at once. For the first time, a single ship could provide credible air defense not just for itself, but for an entire battle group. The combination of Aegis and the SM-6 was the gold standard of naval air defense through the 1980s and into the 1990s. When the Cold War ended and the Gulf War demonstrated that the United States had overwhelming technological superiority, there was a temptation in some circles to believe that the hard problems had been solved. That comfort was short-lived. By the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, a new threat was emerging and growing more dangerous by the year: ballistic missiles. Not the continent-spanning intercontinental ballistic missiles of the Cold War, but the shorter-range, theater-level ballistic missiles that rogue states and regional powers were acquiring in large numbers. North Korea was testing Scud derivatives. Iran was developing its own ballistic missile arsenal. China was deploying anti-ship ballistic missiles capable of threatening aircraft carriers hundreds of miles from shore. The SM-6, for all its excellence, could not intercept ballistic missiles. Its guidance system, its speed, its seeker technology, none of it was optimized for that kind of engagement. The Navy needed something new. The SM-6 was developed specifically for ballistic missile defense, and it became one of the most successful interceptor missiles ever built. But it had a different kind of limitation. It was optimized for the exoatmospheric engagement of ballistic missiles. It was not designed to engage aircraft, cruise missiles, or other conventional threats. And so the Navy found itself in a situation where it needed different missiles for different threats, which created a logistics and loadout problem. Every SM-6 you put in a vertical launch cell was one less SM-6 for conventional air defense. Every ship has finite magazine capacity, and in a complex threat environment, that finite capacity becomes a critical vulnerability. Enter the SM-6. Development of the SM-6, formally designated the RIM 174 Standard Extended Range Active Missile, began in the mid-2000s under the Extended Range Active Missile Program, known as ERAM. The core idea was straightforward but brilliantly executed. Take the proven SM-6 airframe, a missile that the Navy already knew how to build, maintain, and operate, and marry it to the active radar seeker from the AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missile. This was a genuinely inspired combination. The SM-6's airframe gave the new missile excellent range and the ability to operate within the existing Aegis fire control architecture. The AMRAAM seeker gave it something the SM-6 had never had: true autonomy. The SM-6 did not need continuous radar illumination from the launching ship to guide itself to the target. Once it was in the vicinity of its target, it could find the target, track the target, and kill the target entirely on its own. This active seeker capability was transformative for several reasons. First, it massively extended the effective engagement range of the missile, because the ship no longer had to dedicate a fire control radar to illuminating the target for the entire duration of the engagement. The ship could fire the missile and then immediately redirect its radar to other threats. This dramatically improved the ship's ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously, what the Navy calls raid handling capacity, the ability to defeat a large coordinated attack. Second, the active seeker opened up the possibility of what naval planners call over-the-horizon engagements, where the missile is guided to the target area by data from other sources, aircraft, other ships, satellites, and then uses its own seeker to find and engage the target. The launching ship does not even need to have line of sight to the target. This was a genuinely new capability for a surface-to-air missile. The SM-6 entered service with the United States Navy in 2013, and its initial performance was impressive. In test after test, it demonstrated exactly the capabilities it had been designed to provide. Longer range than the SM-2, better performance against maneuvering targets, excellent raid handling capability, and the ability to engage targets beyond the radar horizon of the launching ship when cued by off-board sensors. The Navy was pleased. The program managers were pleased. The fleet commanders were pleased. And then someone, and history does not record exactly who deserves the credit for this insight, though the Naval Surface Warfare Center at Dahlgren, Virginia, is often mentioned. Someone looked at this missile and its active seeker and its extraordinary kinematic performance and asked a dangerous question. Could it kill a ship? On September 17, 2015, the United States Navy answered that question in the most definitive way possible. The USS John Paul Jones, an Arleigh Burr-class destroyer, fired an SM-6 missile at a decommissioned warship serving as a target vessel. The result was not ambiguous. The SM-6 struck the target vessel and caused catastrophic damage. It was not a near miss, not a partial hit. It was exactly the kind of terminal engagement that would be decisive in actual combat. The Navy had just demonstrated that its primary area air defense missile could also function as a potent anti-ship weapon, and the implications were immediate and profound. The SM-6 had just broken out of the box that its designers had built for it. To understand why this was so significant, you need to understand the history of anti-ship missiles and the tactical calculus of naval combat. For decades, the United States Navy had relied on the Harpoon as its primary anti-ship missile, a capable, combat-proven weapon that had been in service since 1977. The Harpoon is a good missile. It was used effectively in combat in the Gulf of Sidra in 1986 and in the Persian Gulf in 1988. But by 2015, the Harpoon was aging, and its performance characteristics, subsonic speed, relatively short range, limited resistance to countermeasures, were becoming increasingly problematic in a world where potential adversaries had invested heavily in their own air defense systems specifically designed to shoot down subsonic cruise missiles. China's People's Liberation Army Navy had surface combatants with sophisticated air defense systems. Russia had invested heavily in electronic warfare systems optimized for defeating subsonic anti-ship missiles. The Harpoon, for all its history, was becoming vulnerable. The SM-6 offered something fundamentally different as an anti-ship weapon. Its speed. It travels at approximately Mach 3.5, more than 3 times the speed of sound, gives enemy air defense systems dramatically less time to react. A Harpoon flying at about Mach 0.85 gives a target ship perhaps 15 to 20 minutes of warning time once detected. An SM-6 coming in at Mach 3.5 gives that same ship perhaps 3 to 5 minutes. The math is brutal. At those speeds, the reaction time available to the target is compressed to the point where successful interception becomes extremely difficult. This is the fundamental advantage of high-speed anti-ship missiles, and the SM-6 brought that advantage to United States surface combatants for the first time. But the speed was only part of the story. The terminal guidance, that AMRAAM seeker, was designed from the beginning to be highly resistant to jamming and countermeasures. The AMRAAM has been developed through decades of continuous upgrades specifically to defeat electronic warfare systems and decoys. When you apply that same seeker technology to an anti-ship engagement, you get a weapon that is significantly harder to spoof or defeat than older anti-ship missiles with more primitive seekers. The target ship's electronic warfare systems, designed and optimized to defeat subsonic, less sophisticated missiles like the Harpoon, found themselves facing a much harder problem with the SM-6. Following the 2015 demonstration, the Navy moved quickly to formalize and expand the SM-6 anti-ship role. The Block I missile, which was already in service, was certified for the anti-ship mission. The Navy began developing doctrine and tactics for employing the SM-6 as an offensive weapon, working through questions about target designation, mid-course guidance, terminal engagement geometry, and integration with the broader naval network. These were not trivial problems. An air defense missile being used offensively against a ship requires a very different employment concept than its defensive role. You need to know where the target ship is. You need to be able to cue the missile with that target data. You need to think about how to get the missile into the right position for its terminal seeker to acquire the target. These are solvable problems. The Navy solved them, but solving them required significant investment in doctrine, training, and software development. By 2016 and 2017, the SM-6 anti-ship capability was being integrated into fleet training and fleet exercises. Surface warfare commanders were learning to think about the SM-6 not just as a defensive tool, but as an element of their offensive strike toolkit. This required a cultural shift as much as a technical one. Surface warfare officers had grown up in a world where the primary strike mission belonged to aircraft and submarines. Surface ships were defenders of the fleet. They shot down threats and provided protection. The SM-6 was one of the weapons helping to drive a renaissance in surface ship lethality, a return to the concept of the surface combatant as an offensive strike platform in its own right. The Block IA variant of the SM-6, which entered service in 2016, brought additional improvements that enhanced both the air defense and anti-ship roles. Software updates improved the missile's ability to engage highly maneuvering targets. The data link communications were enhanced, improving the quality of mid-course guidance and expanding the range of platforms that could provide targeting data to the missile in flight. The Cooperative Engagement Capability, known as CEC, the Navy's distributed sensor network that allows ships and aircraft to share radar tracks in real time, became an increasingly important enabler for SM-6 employment, particularly for over-the-horizon engagements where the launching ship could not directly see the target. It is worth pausing here to appreciate the extraordinary architecture that makes the SM-6 multi-role capability possible. The missile itself is the physical instrument of destruction, but the system that makes it effective is much larger. It includes the Aegis Combat System's ability to manage complex engagements and integrate data from multiple sensors. It includes the CEC network's ability to fuse radar tracks from multiple ships and aircraft into a single, coherent picture. It includes the data link that allows the missile to receive updated target information during flight. It includes the targeting processes and intelligence systems that identify and locate targets. The SM-6 is not just a missile. It is a node in a vast, networked system of systems, and its effectiveness is inseparable from the effectiveness of that broader network. This networked architecture became central to one of the SM-6's most dramatic expansions in role during this period: its use as an anti-ballistic missile interceptor in the terminal phase of engagement. We mentioned earlier that the SM-3 was developed for ballistic missile defense, but the SM-3 is an exo-atmospheric interceptor designed to hit ballistic missiles while they are still in space during their mid-course phase of flight. What happens when a ballistic missile gets through the mid-course defense and re-enters the atmosphere in its terminal phase, diving toward a target at hypersonic speed? Before the SM-6, the Navy's answer was the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, a radar-guided Gatling gun that fires thousands of rounds per minute as a last-ditch defense. The Phalanx is a fine last-ditch defense, but it provides very little margin for error. You want to engage an incoming ballistic missile as early as possible in its terminal phase, giving yourself the maximum possible time for a second shot if the first misses. In 2016, the Navy announced that the SM-6 had been successfully tested in a ballistic missile defense role, engaging a ballistic missile target in its terminal descent phase. This was a stunning demonstration of the missile's kinematic capability and the sophistication of its seeker. Hitting a ballistic missile in terminal phase is one of the hardest things you can ask of any interceptor. The target is moving at many times the speed of sound. It is following a predictable but very fast trajectory, and the closing speeds involved are enormous. The fact that the SM-6 could do this, while also being capable of engaging aircraft, cruise missiles, and surface ships, made it genuinely unique in the world. No other missile in any nation's inventory could credibly claim that range of missions. The combination of area air defense, over-the-horizon anti-ship capability, and terminal ballistic missile defense was so valuable precisely because it collapsed multiple specialized roles into a single missile that could be loaded in the same vertical launch cell. A destroyer with SM-6 in its magazine was carrying an air defense weapon, a terminal BMD interceptor, and an offensive anti-ship missile all in one package. The implications for magazine management, for ship design, for fleet architecture, all of these were profound. You could get more combat capability out of the same number of vertical launch cells. Or, to put it another way, you could achieve the same combat capability with fewer missiles, freeing up those cells for other weapons. The Navy's surface combatants, the Ticonderoga-class cruisers, and the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, have a finite number of Mk-41 vertical launch system cells. The Ticonderoga has 122 cells. The Arleigh Burke has 90 to 96, depending on the variant. These numbers sound large, but when you consider the range of missions a modern warship must be prepared to execute — area air defense, ballistic missile defense, anti-ship strike, land attack with Tomahawk cruise missiles, anti-submarine warfare with ASROC rockets — those cells fill up quickly. Every cell devoted to one mission is a cell that cannot be used for another. The SM-6's multi-role capability helped ease this fundamental tension, though it did not resolve it entirely. As the decade progressed, the SM-6 program continued to evolve, and the Navy's thinking about how to use the weapon continued to mature. One of the most important developments in this period was the growing emphasis on what the Navy calls Distributed Maritime Operations, or DMO. The idea behind DMO is straightforward but revolutionary in its implications. Rather than concentrating naval power in large carrier strike groups where all the firepower is clustered around the aircraft carrier, the Navy should distribute that firepower across a larger number of smaller, more dispersed surface combatants that can operate over wide ocean areas, making it much harder for an adversary to find and target the fleet. The SM-6 was a critical enabler of this concept. In a distributed force, you need individual surface combatants to carry meaningful offensive strike capability, not just defensive weapons. A destroyer that can only shoot down threats is only useful if there is something more valuable nearby to defend. A destroyer that can shoot down threats, defend against ballistic missiles, and also strike enemy surface combatants with long-range, high-speed anti-ship missiles is a standalone combat power in its own right. It can hold enemy naval forces at risk from long range. It can operate independently or in small groups without requiring the shelter of a larger formation. The SM-6's anti-ship capability was not just a nice addition to the missile's resume. It was a foundational enabler of a fundamentally different way of fighting at sea. The strategic context for this evolution was impossible to ignore. China's naval buildup through this period was one of the most dramatic in modern history. The People's Liberation Army Navy was commissioning new destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, and submarines at a pace that no other nation could match. Chinese warships were equipped with sophisticated sensors, electronic warfare systems, and their own anti-ship missiles, particularly the YJ-12 and YJ-18 supersonic anti-ship missiles that posed a serious threat to American surface combatants. The DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, what the Chinese called carrier killers, threatened American aircraft carriers at ranges beyond 1,000 miles. In this environment, the Navy needed weapons that could project power and hold Chinese naval assets at risk from long range, while also providing defense against the sophisticated missiles and ballistic weapons that China could bring to bear. The SM-6 addressed both sides of this problem, and its development trajectory through 2015 to 2025 tracked very closely with the evolution of the American military's understanding of what competition with China would require. This was not an accident. The Navy's acquisition decisions in this period were explicitly shaped by the so-called pacing challenge, the need to develop capabilities that could keep pace with China's rapidly expanding military power. The Block I and Block IA SM-6 were impressive, but the Navy was not finished. Work on the SM-6 Block IB was underway through the late 2010s and into the early 2020s, incorporating further improvements to the missile seeker, guidance system, and lethality. The Block IB introduced a new warhead section designed to provide better effects against hardened surface targets, further optimizing the missile for the anti-ship role. The guidance software was upgraded to improve performance against the most challenging targets, highly maneuvering aircraft, fast-moving surface combatants executing evasive maneuvers, and the increasingly sophisticated decoy and jamming systems being fielded by potential adversaries. One of the most fascinating and consequential aspects of the SM-6's evolution during this period was its role in the development of new operational concepts that blurred the traditional boundaries between offensive and defensive naval operations. In classical naval doctrine, you think of air defense missiles as defensive. They protect your ships from attack. Anti-ship missiles are offensive. You use them to attack enemy ships. Ballistic missile defense is a specialized mission, often thought of as a subset of air defense. The SM-6 collapsed these categories. With a single missile type, a surface combatant could shift seamlessly between defending against air attack, intercepting a ballistic missile, and going on the offensive against enemy warships. This flexibility gave commanding officers options that simply did not exist before. Consider a scenario, one that naval planners undoubtedly wargamed extensively during this period. A destroyer task group is operating in a contested maritime environment. Enemy aircraft approach from the west. SM-6 switches to air defense mode, engaging them at long range before they can launch their missiles. A ballistic missile rises from the east. SM-6 engages it in terminal phase as a last resort interceptor. Enemy surface combatants are detected to the north, attempting to threaten shipping lanes. SM-6 goes on the attack, firing at the enemy ships from beyond their own weapons range. All of this with the same missile, loaded in the same launch cells, managed by the same Aegis system. The operational flexibility this provides is extraordinary. The Navy's testing and exercise programs during 2017, 2018, and 2019 were increasingly focused on demonstrating and validating these multi-mission concepts. Large-scale fleet exercises incorporated SM-6 in its various roles, stress testing the Aegis system's ability to manage simultaneous engagements across different threat categories. The results were consistently impressive, and they fed back into further doctrinal development, further software updates to the Aegis system, and further refinements to the tactics and procedures that fleet commanders would use to employ these weapons in actual combat. The international dimensions of the SM-6 story are also important and often overlooked. The United States government approved the export of the SM-6 to allied nations, and several key allies moved quickly to acquire it. Japan, which faces its own serious ballistic missile threat from North Korea and the maritime challenge from China, saw immediate value in the missile's dual air defense and BMD capability. Australia, deepening its naval capabilities under the AUKUS framework, recognized the SM-6 as essential to the kind of distributed, networked naval warfare concept that its new Virginia-class submarines and upgraded surface fleet would need to support. South Korea, a nation living under the shadow of North Korean ballistic missiles, was another eager customer. The spread of the SM-6 to Allied navies was not just a commercial success for Raytheon. It was a strategic one for the United States, as it meant that Allied warships could operate in integrated, interoperable networks with American vessels, sharing targeting data and coordinating engagements in ways that multiplied the effectiveness of the entire coalition. This interoperability aspect touches on one of the deepest truths about modern naval warfare. The era of the lone, self-sufficient warship is over. No single ship, however capable, can dominate a complex threat environment alone. What makes modern naval power so formidable is the integration of sensors, weapons, communications, and command systems across multiple platforms: ships, aircraft, submarines, satellites, unmanned systems, into a coherent, networked whole. The SM-6 was designed from the beginning to operate within this kind of networked environment, and its effectiveness scales with the quality and breadth of the network it operates in. The concept of cooperative engagement, where one ship or aircraft detects a target and another ship fires the missile, had been a goal of naval planners since the CEC system was first developed in the 1990s. The SM-6's active seeker made this concept far more practical and robust than it had ever been with earlier missiles. In a cooperative engagement, the launching ship does not need to illuminate the target. The queuing ship, which might be an aircraft hundreds of miles away or another warship just over the horizon, provides the targeting data. The missile flies to the designated area and then uses its own seeker to find and engage the target. This extends the effective reach of the engagement system far beyond the radar horizon of any single ship, and it makes the engagement much harder for the enemy to defeat, because interfering with the launch ship's radar does not defeat the engagement if the missile seeker is already active and tracking. By the early 2020s, exercises were routinely demonstrating cooperative engagements where the launching ship had no direct sensor contact with the target at all. The SM-6 was fired based entirely on data provided by other platforms in the network. This was a mature, reliable, tactically validated capability, not just a test range demonstration. Fleet commanders had confidence in it. They were planning around it. They were incorporating it into their fleet disposition and engagement sequencing. The SM-6 had become a genuinely networked weapon in the fullest sense of that term. The period from 2020 to 2025 saw the SM-6 program enter a new phase of maturity and continued development. The Block IB was in production and beginning to replace earlier variants in the fleet's magazine. Work was underway on further upgrades, improved seekers, enhanced networking capability, and investigations into whether the SM-6 airframe could accommodate even more significant performance improvements. The Navy was also grappling with the question of magazine depth, the concern that in a sustained high-intensity conflict against a major power, even the most capable weapons system is only as effective as the quantity of missiles available. This concern about magazine depth was shaping requirements for next-generation surface-to-air missiles, including investigations into what would eventually become the SM-6's successors and complements. But these future programs only underscored how central the SM-6 had become to the Navy's combat power. It was the baseline against which future requirements were measured. If a new missile could not match the SM-6's multi-mission capability while adding something new, greater range, higher speed, improved resistance to countermeasures, it was difficult to justify the investment required to develop and field it. The SM-6 had set the standard. The hypersonic threat added another dimension of urgency to the SM-6's continued development and employment. Russia and China were fielding hypersonic glide vehicles and hypersonic cruise missiles, weapons that traveled at 5 times the speed of sound or faster, maneuvered to defeat predictive tracking, and could strike targets with devastating precision at ranges of hundreds or even thousands of miles. These were weapons that existing air defense systems had been designed to defeat subsonic and supersonic targets, not hypersonic ones. The SM-6 was not designed from the outset for hypersonic intercept, and its ability to engage hypersonic targets is a subject of ongoing testing and development. But the Navy's response to the hypersonic threat illustrated a broader principle about the SM-6 program: incremental, continuous improvement rather than wholesale replacement. Rather than abandoning the SM-6 and starting from scratch, the Navy invested in software updates, improved seekers, and refined engagement geometries to push the missile's effectiveness as far as possible against evolving threats. This approach reflected both the enormous investment already made in the SM-6 and its supporting infrastructure, and a genuine assessment that the missile's fundamental architecture remained capable of significant further development. The SM-6's versatility, the quality that had made it so valuable across multiple roles, also made it a flexible platform for incremental capability growth. The unmanned systems revolution was another major contextual development for the SM-6 during this period. The Navy was investing heavily in unmanned surface vessels and unmanned aerial systems as part of its vision for distributed maritime operations. These unmanned platforms could serve as sensor nodes, providing targeting data for SM-6 engagements from positions far beyond where it would be practical to operate manned surface combatants. An unmanned surface vessel, costing a fraction of a destroyer and crewed by no one, could be positioned close to an adversary's coast, providing radar tracks and targeting data that a destroyer operating at safe standoff range could use to fire SM-6 at targets the destroyer could not directly see. This concept extended the reach of the SM-6 system dramatically, and it did so without putting American sailors at risk. The integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning into the Aegis combat system was also shaping how SM-6 was employed and how future versions would be developed. AI-assisted threat classification, the ability to automatically identify and categorize incoming threats and recommend engagement solutions, was becoming increasingly important as the pace and complexity of potential engagement scenarios exceeded what human operators alone could manage. A saturating attack of dozens of simultaneous threats, including aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, all arriving from different directions at different speeds, is beyond the ability of any human crew to manage manually with the reaction times that modern weapons require. AI assistance in the engagement process was not a luxury. It was becoming an operational necessity. The SM-6's role in all-domain operations, the concept that naval combat is inseparable from operations in the air, space, cyber, and information domains, was another dimension of its evolution during this period. A missile that can be cued by data from satellites, that communicates via encrypted data links, that engages targets identified by AI-assisted sensor fusion, that operates within a broader operational architecture that includes cyber operations and electronic warfare. This is a weapon that cannot be understood in isolation. The SM-6 had become a component of a truly multi-domain combat system, and its effectiveness was inseparable from the effectiveness of all the other components of that system. Perhaps one of the most telling measures of the SM-6's significance is what potential adversaries did in response to its capabilities. China accelerated development of its own advanced air defense missiles specifically designed to defeat incoming attacks from weapons like the SM-6. Russia invested in countermeasures and decoy systems. Both nations studied publicly available information about SM-6 capabilities and adjusted their naval doctrine accordingly. In the cold calculus of military competition, the need to invest in countermeasures is one of the most reliable indicators that a weapon system has achieved genuine strategic significance. The SM-6 had clearly achieved that status by the mid-2020s. The career of the SM-6 in fleet service also generated important lessons about weapon system integration, training, and doctrine development that have shaped how the Navy approaches future capability development. One of the most important lessons was about the relationship between hardware capability and the human systems needed to exploit that capability. The SM-6 could do remarkable things, but only if the sailors and officers using it understood its multi-mission character deeply enough to employ it effectively across all those missions under the stress of combat. Training pipelines had to be expanded. Tactical publications had to be rewritten. Fleet exercise scenarios had to be redesigned to incorporate the SM-6's full range of capabilities. The hardware was only as good as the human infrastructure built around it. Another important lesson was about the value of keeping weapon system development programs open to the possibility that the weapon might find roles and missions that were not anticipated when the original requirements were written. No one who wrote the initial YARIM program requirements in the early 2000s was thinking about the SM-6 as an anti-ship missile. They were thinking about area air defense and possibly some BMD capability. The anti-ship role emerged from a combination of the missile's inherent capabilities, evolving strategic requirements, and creative thinking by operational and analytical communities. Maintaining an open and collaborative relationship between the operational fleet, the analytical community, and the acquisition system, so that insights about unexpected capabilities can quickly translate into formal requirements and doctrine, is one of the enduring lessons of the SM-6 story. The SM-6 also demonstrated the enduring value of investing in flexibility and multi-mission capability rather than extreme optimization for a single purpose. A missile optimized purely for area air defense might have somewhat better performance in that specific role than the SM-6. A missile optimized purely for anti-ship engagement might have somewhat better terminal effects against surface targets. But a missile that can do both, and do terminal BMD as well, provides a quality of operational flexibility that more than compensates for any marginal performance deficit in any single mission area. The Navy learned this lesson with the SM-6, and it is shaping how future weapon systems are being designed and evaluated. As we approach the middle of the 2020s, the SM-6 occupies a central and still evolving place in American naval combat power. The fleet is operating a mix of Block I, Block IA, and Block IB missiles, with plans for further variants under development. The missile is deployed aboard Ticonderoga-class cruisers, all 3 flights of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and is planned for integration aboard the new Constellation-class frigates currently in development. Allied navies operating SM-6 include Japan, Australia, and South Korea, with additional sales under consideration. The global community of SM-6 operators creates a network effect. As each new operator contributes to the body of experience and doctrinal knowledge about how to employ the missile, the entire community benefits. The most recent public tests and exercises as of the mid-2020s have continued to push the boundaries of what the SM-6 can do. Extended range engagements. Cooperative engagements involving unmanned systems. integration with space-based sensors, and over-the-horizon targeting. Terminal BMD engagements against increasingly realistic threat representations. Anti-ship engagements at greater ranges with more sophisticated target maneuvering. Each of these demonstrations adds another chapter to the SM-6's remarkable story, and each one reveals new possibilities for how this missile might be employed in the conflicts, if they come, of the late 2020s and beyond. The SM-6 is also shaping a broader conversation in the naval world about the future of surface ship lethality. For decades, the dominant narrative in naval warfare was about the supremacy of the aircraft carrier. The idea that the most powerful naval force was one built around aircraft, which could project power over long ranges and strike targets far inland. Surface ships existed primarily to protect the carrier. The SM-6, combined with other developments like the long-range anti-ship missile carried by aircraft and the maritime strike Tomahawk, is contributing to a renaissance in the idea of the surface combatant as an offensive power projector in its own right. Not replacing the carrier, but complementing it in ways that make the overall force far more powerful and resilient than a carrier-centric force alone. This is perhaps the deepest and most lasting significance of the SM-6 story. It is not just about one missile. It is about a shift in how naval power is conceived, organized, and exercised. The SM-6 is one of the instruments of that shift, but the shift itself is about how you distribute offensive and defensive capability across a fleet, how you network those capabilities together, how you give fleet commanders the flexibility to respond to complex and rapidly evolving tactical situations, and how you hold potential adversaries at risk across multiple domains simultaneously. The SM-6 did not cause this shift by itself, but it enabled it in ways that would have been impossible without its multi-mission character and its extraordinary kinematic performance. What does the future hold for the SM-6 and for the broader class of naval weapons it represents? The honest answer is that it is difficult to know with certainty, because the threat environment is evolving rapidly and the pace of technological change in areas like hypersonics, directed energy, and unmanned systems is accelerating. What is clear is that the SM-6 will remain a cornerstone of American and allied naval air defense and anti-ship strike capability through the late 2020s and into the 2030s. The investments already made in the missile, its supporting systems, and the doctrinal and training infrastructure built around it are enormous, and the operational value it provides is proven and irreplaceable in the near term. What is also clear is that the SM-6's story, the story of a missile that was designed for one mission and evolved to dominate three, will serve as a model for future weapon system development. The lesson is not just technical. It is about how you build weapons systems with adaptability designed in from the beginning. It is about how you maintain a creative and open dialogue between operational commanders, strategic planners, and acquisition officials so that unexpected capabilities can be recognized and exploited quickly. It is about how you invest in the network and the training and the doctrine that makes a weapon system effective, not just in the weapon itself. These are lessons that will shape naval weapon development for decades to come. The SM-6 began its journey as a defensive shield, a guardian of the fleet against air attack. It evolved into something much greater, a multi-domain weapon that can defend against the full spectrum of aerial threats, intercept ballistic missiles in their final seconds of flight, and reach out across the horizon to strike enemy warships with devastating speed and precision. It is a weapon that reflects the ambition and the ingenuity of the engineers and strategists who developed it, and it stands as one of the most remarkable weapons achievements in the history of naval warfare. From a single vertical launch cell, it projects power across multiple domains, multiple threat categories, multiple tactical situations. It has changed how the United States Navy fights, and it has changed how America's adversaries think about confronting American naval power. That is not a small thing. That is the measure of a weapon that truly matters. So the next time you see footage of a missile rising from the deck of a destroyer, climbing into the stratosphere, and then diving with purpose toward its target, ask yourself what that missile represents. It represents decades of engineering. It represents strategic vision and doctrinal creativity. It represents the networked fighting power of the most capable naval force in history. And it represents the extraordinary truth that in naval warfare, as in so many other domains, the most powerful weapons are not always the most obvious ones. The SM-6 did not announce itself with great fanfare. It proved itself test by test, upgrade by upgrade, roll by roll, until the world could no longer ignore what it had become. And now, before we close this journey through one of the greatest weapon evolution stories in naval history, I want to ask you something. Because this story is not over. The SM-6 is still evolving. The threats it faces are still growing. The strategic competition that drives its development is intensifying. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Given everything you have heard today, given the SM-6's extraordinary journey from pure air defense to multi-domain strike weapon, given the speed of technological change in hypersonics and unmanned systems and artificial intelligence, what do you think is the single most important next step for the SM-6 program? Should the Navy prioritize hypersonic intercept capability? Should it focus on extending the anti-ship range even further? Should it invest in deeper integration with unmanned systems? Or is there something else entirely that you think should be the priority? Drop your answer in the comments below. The best military strategy conversations happen between people who think deeply about these questions, and this community has no shortage of that kind of thinking. If this deep dive into one of the most remarkable weapon stories of our era gave you something new to think about, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a deep dive like this one. New episodes go up every week. And if you want to go deeper, the link in the description takes you to more content on naval weapons, fleet architecture, and the strategic competition shaping the future of sea power. The ocean is a battlefield again. Let's understand it together.